Hello, welcome to the virtual field days. My name is Michael Farrell, and I'm going to be talking today about considerations for starting a either maple or walnut sugaring operation in Missouri or in a nearby state. A little bit of background about myself. I served as director of Cornell University's Maple Research Center for 13 years. It was a great job. I loved it. Got to work with lots of maple producers and got to do lots of other types of sugaring as well, in terms of birch, beech, walnut, uh, other types of trees. And 3 years ago, I started my own company, the Forest Farmers LLC. Now we're the largest tree sap and syrup operation in the world, doing all different sorts of trees. I had published a book on this back in 2013, and really enjoyed working with lots of sugar makers throughout the U.S. I got to work with some folks in Missouri, got to know the good people at the Center for Agroforestry there, and I'm glad to spend some time today talking about options and opportunities for you to consider doing either maple or walnut sugaring there in Missouri or in the Midwest in general. Okay, so basically three options you can consider. Become a syrup producer yourself. You can lease land to another person that wants to make syrup, or you can just collect the sap and sell that or barter with another person who's making syrup nearby. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of these options. Questions you want to ask yourself. There's a lot of them you want to ask yourself, but we're trying to keep this to 20 minutes today. So I tried to focus on some of the main ones. Okay, so first of all, just think about how much time you have. Realistically, how much time can you devote to this? In Missouri, it's going to be mostly between mid to late December until probably you're going to be wrapped up by the end of February. Might go into the beginning of March, depending on how cold the winter it is. Because time is the limiting factor for syrup production. It's just very consuming, and you need to make sure that you really have the time to devote to it, especially that time of year. And find out who else wants to help. How many people want to, either from your family or friends or neighbors that we want to get involved. Sugaring can be a very communal activity. It can also be something you just do by yourself if you just want to get out in the woods and get away from it all. You're going to have to do an inventory, see how many trees you either have yourself on your own property or what you have access to, on neighbors that, somebody wants to lease to you or let you tap. And of course, the species, maybe you have a lot of sugar maple, maybe there's other types of maples, whether it's silver maple, red maple, box elder, um, walnuts. If you want to do walnut syrup, how many black walnuts you have, we'll get into that later. Um, think about what kind of equipment you might already have and what you're going to need, and how much money you're willing to spend to get that, because it can be pretty costly to get started. So also look to see what kind of loans might be available if you wanted to finance the operation. If you're going to be doing this for more than a hobby, and you're looking to sell the syrup, you got to think about where you're going to sell it and how you're going to sell it, and how that fits your personality and your lifestyle. There's farmers markets and there's lots of other opportunities to sell syrup, but you just got to make sure that where you can invest the time to do it, it's going to be worth it for you. And then you really want to kind of get a sense of how much you like collecting sap, being out in the woods, um, tapping the trees, gathering the sap. That's one activity. And then the other activity is, obviously boiling that down into syrup. And you have to do both in order to make syrup, but you might want to just focus on one or the other depending on what your interest is. Screen is not showing. There we go. Okay. Um, so becoming a syrup producer, this is going to obviously require the most time and financial commitment because you're doing it all. And you can, figure out to do it, in an innovative way with on a small scale. But generally speaking, if you want to make money at it, if you want to do this as a business, 1,000 taps would be about the minimum. Um, Anything below that, the amount of startup costs, and especially if you value your time, it's gonna be hard to really make any money as a business with less than 1,000 taps. And you should really just know that going in, that there's a lot of cost that goes into making syrup. It's a great hobby, um, but you you have to realize that it is a hobby and people spend money on their hobbies. They don't make money at their hobbies. So if you want to make it a business, there's a lot of economies of scale at sugaring, and you have to be doing it at a large enough scale to cover your fixed costs. I would highly encourage anybody who wants to do sugaring. There's a very entertaining and an informative um, little video on YouTube. If you Google Vermont maple poem YouTube, it'll come up. It's one of the first things. It's Buzz Coon giving a poem about how he wanted to move to Vermont and start making syrup, and it's hilarious and it's informative, and it's well worth. I think it's like 12 minutes long. As I mentioned, there's lots of fixed costs and variable costs. The fixed costs are what you really got to start to pay down by having more taps, because you're going to have to pay for your land and your taxes no matter what. So you may or may not include those in your fixed costs because you already have that. But if you're going out to buy land to do this, obviously those are fixed costs that you're going to have to incur. You may have a building that you can just dedicate to making syrup, or you're going to have to put something up yourself. Both for the sugar house and maybe something to collect the sap as well. There's lots of equipment that you can buy that adds up quick, and you need to make enough syrup to cover the cost of all that. The variable costs, the biggest ones obviously are your labor and your fuel, and labor is usually the biggest one. A lot of us, we don't pay ourselves to make syrup, so we see it as zero, but really, if you value your time and this is as a business, that becomes your biggest cost. I just want to go over some of the different types of sap collection options, because how you collect the sap is depending on a wide variety of factors. Most notably, first of all, how many trees you're going to do. If you're only going to do a handful, regular buckets or bags is going to work. But when you start getting to the hundreds or thousands of trees, you can do buckets or bags, but it becomes very, very labor intensive. And if you want to make money at it, you really need to have a vacuum tubing system, because you get a lot more sap with vacuum tubing than you do just with a bucket or a bag. I'll go through some of these options here. This is the traditional, galvanized bucket hanging on a tree on a hedgerow. You should know you're not even allowed to use galvanized buckets anymore because of potential lead contamination if you're going to sell your syrup in bulk. There's a lot of them out there for sale because they're not legal for that purpose anymore. You can buy a liner that goes in them, a plastic bag liner basically, so that you can have the look and functionality of the bucket, but not worry about potential lead contamination from the galvanized bucket. And depending on, you can get them fairly cheap, or if you buy new ones, they can be pretty pricey. So you want to look around, and in Missouri, there's not a lot of stuff available locally. There's a ton of it in the Northeast, but then you're gonna have to pay for shipping. The bags are probably, they don't look as good. This is a beautiful scene of a hedgerow full of these buckets on the trees. This is a plastic bag hanging on the tree. People don't really like the looks of it that much, but you get those bags. They're basically the bag in the box liners, for soda at like the soda machines, or a box of wine. You can get them for usually about 50 cents each or so. You can use a 20 to 25% plastic spout and be set up with a brand new sterile collection system every year for less than $1 per tap. And that's the most economical way to go. Doesn't look great, but it's very functional. It's very easy to do, and very inexpensive. Plastic tubing is another option if you're doing it on a larger scale. And if you want to hook up vacuum to it, you're going to spend anywhere, from $4 to $10 a tap for your materials, depending on your density and topography and um, how much you really want to invest in it. If you want to hire it out, you're probably looking at about $15 a tap, but there's really not a lot of people. You have to get somebody to travel to Missouri to put it in for you. So that's going to get a little bit more pricey because there's just not a lot. There's no custom tubing installers that I'm aware of in Missouri right now. If you don't really want to do syrup, or you don't want to go out and collect the sap, but you have all these trees yourself, and you think that's a good idea to do it, see if there's somebody around that wants to do it, that wants to lease the trees from you, because it doesn't require any time on your part. You have no financial commitment into it. In the Northeast, on the low end, people would get maybe 25 or 50 cents per tap, but that's really unheard of anymore. It's usually about $1 per tap in the Northeast now, or they get syrup in exchange. And so if you want some syrup off your land without doing anything yourself, find somebody else that wants to collect the sap and make the syrup, and it can be a win-win. I would highly recommend a written contract, because you want to, and there's lots of templates online, and you can get into some uncomfortable situations if something happens later on once you've started the operation, and then you hadn't talked through a potential issue. Another thing you might want to do is, instead of, maybe you just don't want to make all the syrup, and you don't want to lease it out to somebody else, but there's another sugar maker that would boil your sap if you just wanted to collect it and bring it to them. And so you don't need to build the sugar house and buy the evaporator and the reverse osmosis and all that stuff and spend all your late nights boiling. You can just go out, if you like spending time in the woods, collect the sap, bring it to somebody, they pay you for it, or they provide you with syrup in exchange. Sometimes it's about a 50-50 split, but if the sugar maker has really advanced equipment, they might give you more than 50%. And there's just good opportunities overall to collaborate with somebody who has to be relatively nearby. I mean, you can only truck sap so far before it becomes non-economical to do so. So, if there's somebody in a 10 to 15 mile radius that's making syrup, and they would want to boil more sap, that could be a good option. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the pros and cons of black walnut syrup production. Because there's so many black walnuts in Missouri, there's actually a lot more black walnuts than there are maples. They're very valuable for their timber, but there's a lot of trees out there that aren't so valuable for timber, hedgerow trees or in their yard, and they're just never going to make a veneer or a saw log, but they can produce a lot of sap for you. And so if they're trees that aren't already, slated to eventually be harvested for timber, because that's the main reason people wouldn't want to drill a hole in the walnut trees, then, and you have a lot of them, then it's something you should seriously consider. Walnut syrup is delicious. People love it. It sells at much higher prices than maple because it's a specialty niche item. You can even combine it with maple, do a maple walnut syrup that, you get the uniqueness of the walnut, but it's, it goes further because you're blending it with maple. And so it can be a very, very good product to make from your forest, combining both the maples and the walnuts to get the most value you can out of your land. The reasons you might want to do walnut, as I mentioned, the timber value is the number one. If they're really good timber trees, drilling a hole in them might not be your best financial move long term. And the yield that you get from walnut is a lot less than maple. So they just don't give nearly as much sap as maples do. Um, and it's harder to filter. So because there's naturally occurring pectin in the walnut sap that makes it want to gel up, just like a jelly. It's just naturally occurring in the sap, and it makes filtering the syrup much more difficult. It makes it easy to make walnut jelly if you want to do that, but um, for people that want to make syrup, that pectin can be a challenge. Although if you filter it right and you find the right markets, there's definitely chefs and people that love to spread that pectin on cheese. I've seen that in charcuterie boards, and so there can be a market for it. It is delicious. It's got sugary, walnut syrup mixed into it, and it's really good. But it's difficult to filter out. So you definitely want to make the best use of it if you can. So hopefully that was a good, short and sweet overview of the options. If this piqued your interest, if you want to learn more, um, I'm glad to talk with you over the phone. You can send me an email. And good folks at the University of Missouri are also available to help, and they're a local resource. So um, that's all for today, but there's lots of good opportunities out there, and hopefully, seeing this presentation is just the start of a nice sugaring adventure down the road for you. Thank you very much.